It's time now for a Friday gathering, and this week I'm joined in the studio by Fine Gael TD and Minister of State for European Affairs Jennifer Carroll MacNeill, Chief Economist at the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council Eddie Casey, columnist Brenda Power, and Sinn Féin TD for Mayo Rose Conway-Walsh. And you're all welcome. Thank you for being here this morning. Eddie, I'm going to start with you. Dermot Ferreter has this piece in the Irish Times today about your own organisation. You've probably seen it already at this stage. He says that the budget is further evidence that no one in government is listening to the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, and he goes as far as to say, and listeners, excuse my language here, but it's important to get this message across because it's very strong. He says that you're left once again pissing in the wind.
Yeah, no, I love the piece. It was very colourful. I mean, there is a risk, right, that we're not listened to. Ultimately, it's up to politicians to choose what they want to do with each budget. That's not our right to say exactly what, people want to see in it. But I do think we're being listened to. I mean, I wouldn't be here on the show today if we weren't being. And I do think it's making an impact. And what we would like to see is gradually
listened to, would you say, but ignored?
Mm. Yeah, and maybe it'll continue to be ignored. But I think there's a big crossroads here, right? Once this election, which we'll be talking about later, is out of the way, what are we going to do with the likes of the spending rule? Are we going to actually, put this in place and actually follow it in future? These are the big questions that we need to look for.
Mm-hmm. This is the 5% spending rule, and the politicians say we couldn't have adhered to that because of the war in Ukraine, the inflationary pressures that were on the... Do you accept those?
To an extent.
Excuses.
Yeah, to an extent. Inflation has been high, but it's gone beyond that. If you were to follow inflation in full, which a lot of economists said it is a bad idea because you're adding to the pressures at the same time you're fighting it, they would have done budgets of about 8% every year. But actually they're at about 9% every year, and they could be going into a fourth year next year of that if the overruns continue and if other cost of living measures come in a more permanent way. So there's a risk that we just keep going beyond it, and we don't want to see that happen because it does two things, right? There's two big risks. You add to pressures in the economy, you raise costs, delays, overruns, more prices that everyone's going to face in terms of the cost of living. And we know inflation's coming down, that's great, but it's more to do with imports. It's not to do with the domestic pressures that we create. So different things move at different speeds in terms of prices. Where it's coming through is in things like rents, housing, it's coming through in the services we pay, and lots of those pressures are there. And we can still.
So if you were to pick a word to describe the budget, reckless or responsible?
I wouldn't use either word. It's somewhere in between, right? I don't think it's completely reckless. I wouldn't say that. I think it's risky, and I think that's what we have to be aware of. It's creating this kind of underlying picture of a larger deficit. So they like to say we're running surpluses. Yes, we're running surpluses, but it's all being driven by this multinational receipts we're getting from abroad, right? We're getting incredible levels of corporation tax. If you strip those out, we'd be running large deficits. And that's shown the whole way out to 2030. And what's really remarkable about the budget documents is that you see this radically different picture for Ireland in 2030. One where we've run cumulative surpluses of up to 80 billion, where the windfalls remain, right? That'd be great. Fantastic.
But not guaranteed, of course.
Exactly. And if we don't keep them, we run deficits of up to 50 billion cumulatively. So two radically different pictures. What should you do when you have that environment of uncertainty with money that you can't bank on? Well, you should probably save it. And that's what the Norwegians do. That's what John Fitzgerald is writing in the Irish Times today about. He's saying, let's be less like the Dutch who squandered it and wrecked the economy in the process, and be more like the Norwegians who saved it and created this permanent revenue stream that we can use to tackle problems like ageing and climate.
Okay, so Jennifer, what's your response to that? The budget was risky.
I'm so glad that Eddie mentioned the Norwegians, because of course that's exactly what we set up with the Future Ireland Fund last year, where we put 6 billion into that, a further 4 billion this year, with the express hope of developing a sovereign wealth fund by 2035 of €100 billion, so that policymakers can have the confidence and that the people of Ireland can have the confidence that we have independent financial security in the long term. Now that requires every government between now and then to be really disciplined, not to touch it and to continue to grow it. But it's really very, very important part. We've put money, I hope that some of the Apple tax money will also go into that to help compound that. And we look at the amount of money that was available to this government that was not spent, that is set aside for capital investment to develop infrastructure, which of course I read all of the IFAC reports. You're by no means ignored. I read every word that you say, and I note again and again about how you look at the government to introduce counter-cyclical measures, which we did, for example, with the establishment of the Land Development Agency, which is designed deliberately to work in a counter-cyclical way against the construction industry to the benefit of the state. But at the same time, it still has to build houses. And last week we announced 600 homes in my own area in Shankill that are affordable and cost rental homes and social homes that are being delivered on time, within budget, and meeting the needs of today. And that's the big challenge. Like, we're not here to pass an economist's test. It is one of the things that feature in developing a budget for a society, an economy and a society and a people. And the reality is that inflation has come down over the last number of years from about 9% to about 1.5%. And at the same time that inflation came down, we were introducing once-off measures to help people meet that need. So I don't totally accept the analysis of IFAC that the measures that we're introducing are necessarily inflationary. Inflation has come down at the same time that we've introduced, as best we can, measures to help meet people's needs in the here and now.
So you're saying you can do both?
I'm saying we can do both. And I'm saying that we genuinely try to get that right balance. We have an economy that has gone back into surplus twice after the Brexit shock, after COVID, after the war in Ukraine and the energy spike. We are trying to develop measures that are going to give us long-term security in this state. Energy security so that we don't have price hikes, financial security in the Future Ireland Fund, and a balanced budget between now and then.
Rose Conway-Walsh is chomping at the bit to come in there.
Well,
go ahead, Rose.
There's a whole lot there, but I am glad that Eddie mentioned the first place in Norway, because obviously Norway have control of their natural resources and their oil and gas, and it's for the benefit of the people, and they have the sovereign wealth funds there. Indeed, they have some of the Irish benefits that the Irish people should have as well from our own oil and gas. So and he's absolutely correct that we would be running a deficit. I think it's about 5 to 6 billion deficit this year if it wasn't for the foreign direct investment. Now, I think budgets are about choices, and obviously the government had a choice to make in this budget. They had 24 billion to do that. But I agree with Social Justice Ireland when they say that there's no sense of national purpose to this budget, and that there are unlimited resources but very limited vision around it, because there's a number of things that could be done within the budget, particularly around housing, childcare and for carers as well. And I think that wasn't done. Now, I welcome the cost of living measures that were in the budget. And I think they're absolutely necessary.
The one-off payments.
Yeah, because I do think they're necessary in terms of where we're at and inflation and the impact of inflation. So just because it's coming down doesn't mean that people have more money in their pocket. They don't. So that was necessary. But there's also necessary. So for childcare, for instance, you could have done what we showed how you could do €10 a day childcare, how you could invest in the sector, how you could invest in the wages and the workers within that sector as well. That would solve the problem of people having to go out and parents having to go out and pay. I spoke to parents yesterday, pay over €2,000 a month for childcare. So in care is the same way. I was very, very surprised that they didn't, that the government didn't get rid of the means test or talk about getting rid of the means test. Now, I welcome the movement that's there in terms of the increase in the eligibility, but they should have gone much further than that. We said on our road, and obviously Mary Lou McDonald made the commitment to get rid of the means test. I think that is crucial, because we can't say on one hand we really respect what carers are saving the economy and the work that we're doing, and then on the other hand not show in the budget that you have an intent to really pay for that work and to recognise that they're saving the state about €20 billion. So there are a number of things. And obviously housing, the money that was announced for housing and the money to the LDA was money that was announced last December, and it was announced, it was last October and December it was announced as well. So
not correct.
It's kind of the regurgitating. So the targets haven't changed from what I can see, and certainly from what Ona Brennan, the targets haven't changed. So there isn't a recognition there of the radical reset that the Housing Commission asked for.
Okay, so Jennifer, you want to come back in? Brenda, I'll go to you then.
First of all, housing, as Rose knows, set on a multi-annual budget structure so as to provide the security and predictability and planning that people have looked for in delivering housing. But there was an additional 1.25 billion put into the Land Development Agency to continue the good work that it's doing in Shankill, Dundrum and all around the country.
But was that not announced last year?
No, it wasn't. It's new from the funds.
No, it was last year.
And the addition on the means test on carers, for example, Heather Humphreys has extended the eligibility for carers 3 times in this government to bring more and more hard-working carers into being eligible for the carers allowance. We want to get to a point where carers are there's a very different spectrum of the work that's done, and you can't treat all carers in the same way. We would like to get to the point where the level of work that is being done by carers is genuinely recognised and rewarded. But abolishing the means test, and maybe we will get to that, but that isn't a costed proposal at this point, and we have to be, you know what I mean. As you said,
you're saying it is, Rose.
We have to be.
There's parameters.
It's not by social welfare. It's not by social welfare. And as Heather Humphreys has demonstrated again and again, her commitment to bringing more people who are caring into that network, to increasing carers allowance, increasing the once-off payments for carers, and we're going in a direction that genuinely recognises the extraordinary work that carers do. But as you say, Claire, as I've said, this has to be a balanced, incremental approach. Otherwise, we'd be criticised by IFAC. And we're trying to take this incremental, developmental approach that is reasonable. Okay, and I'm so glad to hear Rose
you're saying
wanting to put money back in people's pockets, because that's what we've done. But unfortunately, you keep voting against budgets that do that. You keep voting against budgets that do cut tax to put money people back. But maybe this year you'll vote to support putting money back in people's pockets.
We absolutely will not be voting for the budget in the way the budget has left too many people behind. We see from the ESRI again today that it doesn't tackle the inequality that's there. Inequality is growing and growing in this country, and nothing has been done about it. So there's the winners and the losers, and there's content. So what we would,
listening to all of this, can I ask you specifically about the one-off payments? Do you welcome them, or do you think they're cynical?
I think they're cynical, and I don't think how you could view them in any other way. One-off payments, by definition, should have been paid once. The rationale for those payments back in 2022 was the inflationary effects of the post-COVID era and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. To be paying them again at a time when inflation is obviously under control is nothing other than a bag of sweeties for the electorate at this time. And I mean, those of us who remember politicians just like Jennifer 15 years ago making just as eloquent and well-argued positions to explain away the fact that we weren't heading for a crash and that we were going to have a soft landing, have to be chilled by the warnings from the Fiscal Advisory Council. I'm just seeing a quote that Dermot Ferreter has today from the first chairman of the Fiscal Advisory Council, who said its role was to institutionalise the memory of the economic crisis. He said that memory is clearly not strong enough to withstand the primacy of electoral cycles. Mm-hmm. And when the Fiscal Council says you are pumping money into an overheating economy, you risk repeating the errors of the past. We really should be listening.
I heard Dan O'Brien, I think on your show this week, saying that it wasn't comparable to that period, that the rate of spending increase was nowhere near comparable to that period. Mm-hmm. It's built on completely different grounds, and it's responding to an extraordinarily growing population. And I don't think anybody could accuse Pascal Donoghue, of all people, of being imprudent. He has delivered.
We read this morning from Jack Morgan-Jones that he was uncomfortable with some of the measures.
Pascal is always uncomfortable, but the reality is that that's fine. But it is that constraint that is really, really important within a government system.
Dan O'Brien did say that some of those one-off measures could be inflationary. I mean, when you look at child benefit for every parent in the country, regardless of how much they have, getting a double before Christmas, I mean, that's just about an election.
A few years ago, Michael O'Leary came out and said, I should not be getting this money.
He's welcome to give it back.
He has 3 kids under the age of 18. He will get €280 for each of those 3 kids before Christmas. How is that fair?
He's welcome to give it back, but I know, speaking to my constituents from Shankill to Booterstown, there are people who really very welcome that. And you're right, inflation has come down, and that is again part of the management of Pascal Donoghue and Michael McGrath. But prices are still much higher than they were 3 years ago, and that it recognises that pressure. Now, that inflationary change obviously is a temporary thing. We certainly hope we're not going back to high inflation, but we have to respond.
I think the way you address that in terms of Michael O'Leary's comments, because I would agree with him in that, but you do it from the other end in terms of combining taxation and welfare. So if you have somebody, for instance, as we have in our budget, somebody earning over 140,000, that on the portion of income above 140,000, you then get them to pay a solidarity tax of 3%. Those earning above 100,000, you reduce the tax credits as well. So there's a way there's a way to do that in it. I'll just get you the figure on it, but it is several hundred million that can be bought in that way. So I think, are you the interviewer?
Well, are you going to vote against tax cuts for ordinary workers earning 42,000? Because that's what we're trying to bring in. We're
Right.
trying to
Let me
target
just
money
tell
to
you.
people that are earning less than 44,000 euros. That's where our priority
Yes.
is. I don't know
Well,
why you're so
no, but-
obsessed with people over 104. Because
No.
we're trying to, and we have voted against
Sorry,
tax cuts
Jennifer,
again
could you
and
just,
again for
Jennifer,
families
could I
on working
just
families.
outline to you the way we would do that through the USC, and that's why we would abolish the USC for anybody earning under 30,000 euro a year. We want to bring that to 45,000, so that the average worker in this country would not have to pay the USC. Now, we worked it out that was a better way to do it than what the government have done.
Just vote for this budget, which reduces USC and
for
reduces
God's sake,
income tax
you can
on
vote
those
for
workers.
you can vote for your own budget and stand over your own budget, Jennifer.
I do. Again
and
and
you
again
can
I
watch
do.
inequality growing
No,
in
that's
this
not the
country.
case. That's not
and
the
you can
case.
continue to skew everything in favour of those who don't have
We are
who have money.
targeting working families who are earning less than
Okay,
44,000
listen, I want to-
and trying to
I
take
want
them
to
out of the
move-
higher rate of tax.
on
Yeah, just
the
very
USC,
briefly,
understand why
what-
they're not.
what the government have done on the USC is to bring it from 4% to 3%. Now,
we're
for
cutting USC.
for somebody earning 150,000 euro a year, they would get 959 euro extra. For somebody earning 40,000 a year, they would only get 369.
Eddie, do you want to
How
come in
can
on that
be
point, on the
fair?
USC
As
point?
a proportion of
Okay.
income.
Eddie,
That is a
Eddie, go
proportion.
ahead.
Do you understand
I wanted to
Eddie,
come
go
back
ahead,
in
please.
and
Proportion.
two
really
points that
understand.
were
Good.
raised.
Don't be
Right?
so
One is
Sorry, but one moment, Eddie, please go ahead.
So 2 points raised. One is, are we saving some of this money? We are, right? We're putting some money into a sovereign wealth fund, but it's only about a third. And like we heard earlier, there's a risk, right? We don't know what's going to happen the rest, and it's kind of open season on that. So we might expect the policymakers in the future to be disciplined with it, as was said, but we can't guarantee that. And when we look to things that might suggest discipline, we might think of a spending rule, but that's really been kind of flouted recently. And the other thing is inflation. So this is a really hard thing for us to argue, and I think we're getting the messaging, we're finding it really difficult because the numbers are coming down. So what does that mean? Well, it means that prices are still high. It's just that they're not rising as fast as they were. But that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that by virtue of having gone beyond the spending rule, the speed limit every year, they've added to the price level. So it's now about 2% higher than it was. What does that mean for you and me? It means for every household, on average, it's added about €1,000 to how much they have to pay for outgoings.
But Eddie, this is our rule that we brought in, and as politicians we recognise that since that was brought in 2021, we've had a major price spike because of the invasion of Ukraine and a rapidly growing population. And we have to do both. We have to set parameters and also respond to the needs of the day, a growing population and the services that they need. And if we weren't to do that, you would rightly criticise us for failure to invest. Like, I mean, you are looking for us to put in massive money to infrastructure. Part of that is meeting today's need in a growing
haven't
population.
done that.
As well as
You
that,
haven't-
we
you
have
haven't done
set
that,
aside
Jennifer.
significant funds. There has never been a
Jennifer.
bigger capital budget of 14 billion euros. There has never been a bigger
So
capital
why are
budget
we in the bottom
state.
5% in the West and Northwest in terms of the EU competitive index there for infrastructure? You have not invested in the areas that need to be invested, and that is the one thing that's going to protect us from a recession again in terms of investing in our infrastructure. I am really fearful for the regions, that lack of investment of what we'll do. We will be so exposed in terms of foreign direct investment, in terms of our
All right.
competitiveness,
Okay,
productivity.
Brenda, I'm
Well, I
going
was
to
just gonna say, wasn't that
And
one
it's
of the
three-
issues?
Which is why we have put
And it's
14 billion euros into
395,
capital
it's three-
expenditure. And why Heather Humphreys has rolled out broadband
can
across
see
the
for
country,
themselves.
put in town and village
that we
renewal
won't
right
even
across
own
the country.
infrastructure.
Brenda, I want to talk to you about the phone pouches, but is there something you want to say about that, or will we
No,
move
I was
on?
just going to say that was one of the issues apparently that Apple raised in a meeting with the government recently enough, that the infrastructure in Cork
Yes.
simply wasn't there to
And they're
sustain
being
a
courted
workforce
by all sorts of countries all over
and
the
they're being
world.
courted by other countries. The phone pouches. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to cause anything like as much outrage as the little things in other budgets that have tripped governments up. But I really do think that it is a kind of a symbolic of a sort of wastefulness and a lack of real awareness of what's really needed other than making a grand gesture.
So this is the €9 million to put your phone into an
to put your phone.
electronic pouch in secondary school.
Apparently lots of schools have been managing this already, whether it's a box in the principal's office and a bag of sticky labels. They've all managed to implement this without having to spend €30 per child on an electronically controlled bag.
I thought it was
to take the
interesting this
full off
morning.
them.
Simon Harris was on News Talk and he said it was important to provide a degree of discretion and common sense guidance to schools around this issue. He said that if a school has a better idea about how to spend the money, he would be open to that conversation.
Look at where has he been? Where has he been? The teachers.
Well, what does that mean?
We will all have met the teachers. There's not one of us that won't have been to a school fundraising do in the last 6 months, whether it be a card game, whether it be whatever kind of social that's organised to try and keep the bills paid within the schools. There are so many things that need to be done in schools. All you have to do, no more than the hospitals, listen to the frontline people, listen to the teachers, listen to the parents, and there you get your solutions. Not saying, well, I know you want this, but this is what we think is good for you. We think spending 9 million on pouches for mobile phones is really the thing for you, because that's going to protect your mental health.
But it sounds now, Jennifer, I don't know if you've heard anything about this, that the schools won't have to spend the money on the pouches. Maybe there'll be a fund there that they can draw on for other things, according to what Simon Harris said this morning.
Well, I think what Simon Harris is most concerned about is protecting our children and their mental health and their well-being, whether that's on a mobile phone or whether that's on a laptop, and it doesn't matter, no matter who or what you are. Protecting our children is the most important thing, and that has come up again and again this week. And I want to tell you, I've written to your party leader, Mary Lynn McDonald, about child protection issues in your own party this morning, Rose. People need to know exactly how seriously
Thank you, Jennifer.
Sinn Féin take child protection.
We are talking about mental health.
We are talking about the protection of children, the protection of children from a whole range of different things, from pornography, from inappropriate mobile phone use, from sexting, from a whole range of different things.
And their mental health.
What Simon Harris is concerned about and what the government is concerned about is the protection of children generally.
Look at the waiting list for CAMS.
There's a number of different issues, and I'm happy if you want to address those.
Look at the waiting list for CAMS. Look at how the children waiting for assessments, all of those things have been ignored. And suddenly the solution to everything is mobile phone pouches.
I think the child
during
protection
school
issues are
hours
much broader than that.
Like, it's crazy. And to try and pass it off, not to try to put your hands up and say, okay, right, we made a mistake here. We should have listened to teachers, and we should have and indeed we should have listened to people who want investment in mental health and mental health for children.
Okay.
And
on inheritance tax, you have your former colleague in Fine Gael, Alan Shatter. He says that inheritance tax is a graveside robbery of assets. And he's driving quite the campaign now on this, with public meetings in the constituency alongside your own. He seems to be getting a lot of support. And his argument is that people are paying tax on an asset that they have bought using funds that they've paid tax on already. Do you agree with him in principle on it?
Look, I don't agree with abolishing inheritance tax, but I certainly agree with increasing the threshold at which it's paid. And, we have done that this year up to 400,000. Whether you're transferring a home, a farm, a small business, it matters an awful lot to people, the investment that they have put into their big primary assets, because as Alan says, and as you have said, this is after tax money that they have spent and paid tax on.
I'm quoting
a number
Alan.
of different
It's not my view. It's Alan Chatter's view.
As you quote Alan, fine, but it's after tax income, as you say, that they are paying tax. So we have increased the threshold to 400,000 for that category A, that parent to child relationship. I know Sinn Féin would put up inheritance tax rather than recognising the concerns of Middle Ireland yet again, but we are trying to make the burden less in terms of transferring those major assets, and it's really important for farmers.
Okay, so this would impact about 3% of the population. We believe that 335,000 is sufficient to be able to pass on without any tax. It is minor. And in terms of farmers, obviously, land is a factor of production. So so that can be exempt from it. There isn't a problem there. So don't be trying to throw the farmers in again in the same way that they were thrown in for the land hoarding tax. So we're doing it to protect the farmers. It is crazy. They're being used as an excuse, and farmers knows that. They can see
Eddie,
through that.
on the VAT rate for hospitality, so the decision was taken to leave it at 13%, and there has been outcry from that industry. They say that there will be more closures as a result of not reducing it to 9%. Whose side are you on?
No side, but a budget is about choices. We just want you to stick to the speed limits, okay? But on this, it's interesting, right? Because already the Restaurants Association have come out, said they'll probably have to raise prices. That's possibly true. We don't know, right? But what we do know is that by virtue of going beyond the speed limit and adding more money into the economy and flooding it all over the place, there is a risk that you push up prices. And some of their costs, if you look at restaurants, typically it's things like staff, it's things like rent and things like insurance, marketing. Lots of those things are domestic. They might get some relief from the imported costs coming down, things like energy energy, things like food, but those things still look like they could be under pressure.
Well, there was an argument made during the week that because people now will have more money in their pockets in the lead up to Christmas, they might spend that money in those hospitality outlets.
True, but
They'll
they
have
might find they have to pay
€20
more.
a
But
week
it's not
each.
just the question of businesses with rising staff costs. It's not just hospitality, it's also retail. It's people with large staff turnovers.
Did you want to see the rate coming down?
I knew that the Department of Finance, and there had been a decision not to put that back up. It was a post-COVID measure, a temporary measure. But what we have tried to do is introduce supports for smaller businesses. And Peter Burke has continued to advocate, as he should, for the businesses in his area.
He wanted the rate to come down as well.
and he advocated strongly for that. But what he is doing is providing energy supports to about 40,000 businesses in advance of Christmas to try to help meet some
Rose,
of that
10
challenge.
seconds.
Yeah, well, I think it was all the kite flying and the expectations for the hospitality sector. I think that they were quite shocked when this came out. What we would have shown a PRSI rebate of €250 million to
All
small
right,
business.
listen, we have to leave it there, but thank you all very much for coming in. Thank you at home for listening. You can catch up with anything you might have missed on the RT Radio app. The programme was produced by series producer Niamh Lyons, research by AB Philp and Bowman. Our broadcast coordinator is Michelle Gibson. Dave Gibson was on sound, and it's time for Louise.